Merkaba had fallen on a dry, scorching morning as the early April sun rose over the Libyan desert. The British front line had crumbled, and the 2nd Armored Division was retreating in utter chaos. The final dam had broken, and Rommel's Afrika Korps, the Desert Fox, was advancing like an unstoppable tide toward Benghazi. Every step he took was more than just an attack, it was a calculated march across the desert, where each grain of sand bore witness to the decisions that would determine the fate of entire divisions. In the weeks prior, Rommel and his forces had undergone a remarkable transformation. Upon arriving in North Africa, he had been tasked with temporary reactive measures, struggling to counter immediate Allied threats. Yet in just a few weeks from cautious maneuvers, he had turned the Afrika Korps into a mobile, flexible, and lethal war machine. The Battle of Mara had shown that speed, surprise, and decisiveness were his most formidable weapons. The British had yet to grasp the storm approaching. On the morning of April 2nd, the Libyan desert burned under the rising sun. The 5th Light Division of Germany and Italian units awaited orders from the skies. Luftwaffe pilots observed the British forces retreating east along the Via Balbia. Once confirmed, Rommel gave the order to attack Agadir, the next British-held town east of Mariga. This decision defied Berlin's orders, but for Rommel, limits were mere suggestions. He divided his forces into 2 prongs, north and south, led by the 5th Panzer Regiment, moving like a whirlwind across the desert. The night before the battle, German officers worried about the lack of intelligence and the vast desert terrain, but Rommel's sharp vision saw opportunity. He knew the British were avoiding decisive engagements. As the sun rose, German tanks raced forward, heading straight for the British rearguard. There's 14 tanks, lacking infantry or artillery support. The clash was brief but tense. British tanks emerged from Arab tents and fired unexpectedly, destroying 3 panzers. The British rearguard gained precious minutes for the main force to retreat. Across Guernica, only 12 British medium tanks remained, along with 26 captured Italian M13s and 18 light tanks. Yet the desert itself was the true threat. Fine sand, scorching heat, and fuel shortages wore down the British far more than German firepower ever could. Meanwhile, General Wavell arrived at Lieutenant General Philip Heim's command post late on the afternoon of April 2nd. He realized the severity of the situation, but it was already too late. The 2nd Armored Division was retreating through Skaledima, opening the strategic Via Balbia to Rommel en route to Benghazi. Wavell ordered the coastal route held as long as possible, but conflicting and delayed orders rendered efforts futile. The sudden dismissal of Nîmes and the inability to appoint Richard O'Connor, who had famously defeated the entire Italian 10th Army, further compounded the confusion. At dawn on April 3rd, the consequences were clear. British tanks were scattered, broken down, and out of fuel. Around 20 tanks were abandoned, including some Italian M13s. The 9th Australian Infantry Division, stationed around Benghazi, had its lines stretched, leaving the city vulnerable. Rommel realized the British sought to avoid decisive battles. He chose to pursue them, aiming to capture the entirety of Guernica. Part of his forces moved around the southern desert, from Agadir through Benganina and to Nader to Tamimi, intending to encircle the remaining British units. In the early hours of April 4th, the 3rd Reconnaissance Unit seized Benghazi at 3 o'clock a.m. Rommel recognized the strategic importance of Fort Mechili, a major supply depot and a defensive stronghold. He dispatched German and Italian forces toward Mechili, but the British were prepared, with Indian and Australian divisions ready to resist. Rommel was warned about the dangers of the Agadir-Gwopal-Mata route, yet he pressed on. Harsh desert terrain damaged many German vehicles, but the Desert Fox remained resolute. By 6 p.m., the 3rd Reconnaissance Unit reached Er Regima Pass, where Australian forces waited. The forthcoming battle would decide whether Rommel could seize Mechili or if the desert itself would up his momentum. The Libyan desert remained a silent witness to the Desert Fox's march, a place where speed, cunning, and courage contended with the unforgiving forces of nature. Rommel was not only fighting the British, he was racing against time, fuel shortages, harsh terrain, and the limits imposed by Berlin. Every decision, every advance, was a challenge. and the tide of his campaign continued to flow from Agadir to Benghazi. From small skirmishes to decisive battles, leaving the fate of al-Qarinaqa hanging over the scorching sands.